Welcome to episode 503 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm excited to reintroduce you to Jason Voiovich, author of Bullfrogs Bingo and The Little House on the Prairie. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Okay, I'm guessing a book named like Bullfrogs Bingo and The Little House on the Prairie might have you a little curious, right? And some of you might be thinking, that sounds a lot like another book you featured recently. And that's because Jason Voiovich, author of Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress, is back to discuss his newest book with a similar naming convention, but a brand new era of innovation to share with us. The last book was about the Roaring '20s, and this one is taking us into the Great Depression, an era that most of us think is a time where no one was buying anything and likely don't think much about inventions of the era. But as necessity is indeed the mother of invention, being in a time of extreme scarcity meant there was a lot of opportunity for people to get scrappy and innovate, both as consumers and the companies providing goods and services during this difficult time. I don't want to spoil it and share too much here, but trust me, this book and today's conversation are jam-packed with amazing stories. Before we get into it, let me tell you a little bit about Jason. With a career that spans more than 25 years, he has launched hundreds of new products. Everything from medical devices to virtual healthcare systems to non-dairy consumer cheese to next generation alternatives to the dreaded cone of shame for pets to reproductive aids for cows. He is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin and the University of Minnesota and has completed postgraduate studies at the MIT Sloan School of Management. While he says that his formal training has been invaluable, he credits his success to growing up in a family of artists, immigrants, and entrepreneurs. They taught him how to carefully observe the world, see patterns before others notice them, and use those insights to create new innovations. History is Jason's favorite way to observe the world, and he believes the people from the past have plenty to teach us about the challenges and opportunities we face today. And you'll definitely learn more about that as we dig into the Great Depression today. Really quickly, before we get into the conversation, I want to be sure you know that there are links in the show notes for my top related past episodes and books, ways to get in touch with Jason and myself, and more. It's all within the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/503. Now let's jump right in. Jason Voiovich, welcome back to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Welcome, and thank you for having me. It is really excited to be here.
Yay, I am excited too. I have loved now both of your books that I have had a joy to be able to read, and I'm so excited to be able to share these amazing stories and insights with the audience. For everyone who doesn't yet know you, can you share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, you got it. I am a practicing chief marketing officer, a fractional chief marketing officer. That just means I work part-time for a number of different clients. I have been in the new product development and innovation business for the past 25 years or more. I help my dad and my family. I come from a long line of, entrepreneurs and immigrants and inventors and those sort of people who made something of themselves. So there was a lot of pressure on me as a kid to choose this as a career. So no big surprise that I am where I am now. So, but yeah, that's, I originally got into writing history because I simply was interested in it. And I, for my clients and for my business, the more insight and the more knowledge I could bring to the table, the better off they were. Innovating, inventing is hard. It is really, really, really hard work. The failure rate is very high. Any advantage we can have. And if I can take lessons from history, we'll take it. So that's really my value proposition as a fractional CMO that helps other clients innovate is I don't just have my experience. I don't just have kind of recent case studies or whatever you might read on Harvard Business Review. I've got hundreds of years of other people who have done really similar things. So that's what I try to bring to the table.
I love it. And I think that's a good sort of a segue into wanting to ask about, and I know you and I have talked about this a little bit, and I can't remember if we talked about it on air when you were here before, but it is worth all the time. So, as far as how so how do you go about finding these stories these days, right? So is it all online research? Are you going into old libraries and finding stuff? Are you calling companies and getting access to their archives? Like, how do you go about finding some of these untold stories these days? I feel like it's a lost art. Like, very few people know where to go search to find this sort of cool stuff.
Yeah, there's no prompt for this, right? It can get you started. There's when you really think about the process of primary source research, which is really what this is, it's a little bit like a treasure hunt. Yes, you can find online. There are lots of great resources online, and I don't want to create the impression that I'm traipsing through old libraries all the time and kind of digging, dumpster diving in 3M or General Mills. It's nothing like that. There are plenty of places. And what's nice online now is a lot of the really old books have become digitized, and you can go to archive and you can, check out. Basically, it's kind of an online digitized library. So there's a lot of great stuff there. I do have an entire bookshelf in front of me of very smelly old books. I have a first edition copy of Bullfrog Farming for Pleasure and Profit, which is Dr. Albert Broll's book on exactly what it says it is. And it has his own notes in it, his own scribbles, his own stuff, and, from basically the 1930s. So there's getting those books from the archives. There's sitting in research libraries, and a lot of the archivists are great about sending you those sort of materials, but you do have to know what you're looking for. And that's the thing. I am an innovator. I'm not a historian. So I've had to, it's kind of how I explain it to people is, let's say you were going to write a history of farming, but you've never grown anything before. Yes, you can do that history, but you bring something different to the table when you've actually been a farmer who will train on the history versus a historian that's going to get trained on farming. I think there's something that I know to look for in the primary sources that historians really don't. And when I read histories of innovation from other historians, I'm often frustrated by, why did you not ask that question? Why did you not look into this? This is like you are glossing over something that is really, really hard and just kind of skipping over big parts of that development process. So I can look at those primary sources in a different way than a historian can. That means, obviously, I need to teach myself all of the tough tradecraft that historians need to look at. What is that source? Where did that source come from? How valid is it? What else was going on at the time? There are a lot of blind spots that I have. So I have a number of historians that I have as readers of mine that help catch some of those things for me. But yeah, it's a wonderful process. It's when you look at the history of innovation, so often you read a case study in Harvard or wherever. They're so sanitized. Even book case studies that are a little bit longer they're so linear. They're like, hey, this happened, then this, then this. What you really realize when you go in and you look at these primary sources, you look at the notes from the inventors themselves, you realize that they had no clue what was going on. And they had to figure all that out as they went. And for people who are innovating and inventing, it's actually really empowering to see that, people who you look up to really struggled with the same things that you're struggling with. And it makes you feel like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. They kind of had the grit. They had a little bit of luck. They made it through. You can too. That's what's so great to me. That's why I love doing that type of work.
Oh, definitely. And I think, as you're saying there's that hindsight bias when we're doing the case studies these days, right? And you say, well, like, it's so obvious that this would turn into this, and look at how, ingenious it was. And so I think that's really cool to be able to see the notes and realize that, like you said, there's luck and serendipity and thoughtfulness and a lot of trial and error and so much that goes into that. And just that curiosity that is important in innovation, I think, is really shows up in the way that you're doing that research, right? Where it's saying like, but what about this and what about that? And just wanting to find a little bit more and dig deeper, I think is really great. And we can all be very appreciative that you do that work, so we can do less of it if we don't have the time and can learn from your insights. So really quickly, we'll do what was the first book we talked about, and what's this new one? What's the difference? Why, write two? And, like I can talk, right? I've got the three, but what's the, tell a little bit about what we got going on and what's different about them.
Yeah. The first book in this trilogy that will be a trilogy of books. yes. Was Booze, Babe, and the Little Black Dress. And it was all about the Roaring 20s. So this was about the creation of consumer culture. When we got all kinds of new things as Americans, we got radios, we got cars, we got all fast food, we got all kinds of things in the 1920s. It was a tremendously disruptive time. Now, it was, for those of us who lived through the creation of the internet and how much that changed our lives, that was not even close. If I were to take you back 100 years, you would recognize the world as it was in 1925. If I took you back 10 years past that to 1915, you would be utterly lost. So we had grocery stores, we had department stores, we had big box stores, we had all those things. So the stories in the book are all about how we as Americans coped with all of that. And we became consumers. It wasn't really consumer culture because that implies that it was always this kind of monetary transaction. It was about choice culture. So we learned how to do, how to make choices en masse. Doesn't mean we were always perfect at it, but we learned how. This next book is really a continuation of that. What would happen after October 29th, 1929, when the stock market crashed and everything hit the fan? So for the next decade, where we had the Great Depression, would that just go away? Would all of those skills just say, oh, well, gosh, no, that's all gone. Now what's going to happen when we don't have all this money? We don't have all this roaring and everything, like people are starving, people are migrating. What would happen then to innovation? Would it kill innovation or would it accelerate innovation? And the whole point behind the new book, and again, titles, I do kind of love the titles. A shout out to John Arms, who originally helped me with the first title. The new title is Bullfrogs Bingo and the Little House on the Prairie. How innovators of the Great Depression made the best of the worst of times. This book is all about how necessity is the mother of invention. And that the Great Depression, rather than being a hindrance on innovation, was an incredible accelerator of innovation in lots of different areas of our lives. What we kind of live with today, many of the things we live with today are Depression era inventions that most people kind of take for granted and don't remember came from that era.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always so fascinating reading your books and all the stories. And I love that even though there's crossover, of course, things were happening at the same time. I think most people would look at sort of a chronological place, right? So it's like, for chapter 1 is this year, and then chapter 2 is this year, and then this. And so by having the story of Scotch tape and the story of penny restaurants and Monopoly / the landlord's game, and all these, they each, have their own chapter, and you get to learn about them just as a story and see how that all is. And it can build on itself, but they don't have to be, like a little of this and a little of that. I think it just makes for a really great read, and that you can just pick up a chapter and read about it, which is very nice, and not have to have read everything before to have any context in it. If you were going to I mean, Scotch tape was the first of the chapters in the book. Is that the right place to start if you were going to pick like a top one that you like to talk about? But it's not in the title, so I don't know.
No, it's not in the title, but I thought it was first because it was a nice bridge between the 1920s and the 1930s. And Drew Gurley was the inventor. He was from Minnesota. He was a banjo player, of all things. Really, he dropped out of college. He talked himself into a job at 3M. 3M immediately hired him to deliver sandpaper. So just kind of crazy guy. There are lots of stories of musicians as inventors. So if you're a creative person, you're a musician, you're a singer, you're something like that, and you think, well, I can't be an inventor. I can't be an innovator. Well, you would be wrong. There are lots of people in there. Richard Gurley Drew was a great bridge between the 1920s and the 1930s. 1920s, one of the big things that people were doing, like people thought, okay, this is Henry Ford. You can have any color as long as it's black, right? Well, if you were trying to compete with the Model T, paint was one of the big ways to do that. Imagine painting something without masking tape. I mean, just shockingly difficult. Drew and the folks at 3M figured out how to add basically temporary adhesive, the same thing that Post-it notes are famous for today. He was the person who invented that in the late 1920s that basically created masking tape. Awesome. That was really cool. As we get into the Great Depression, people were starting to figure out how to package food and how to save food. And okay, we have cellophane. Well, there's no way to seal cellophane. You're not going to seal it with masking tape. That's not a really good way to seal it. You want a clear tape. Well, Drew figured out how to basically do the same thing with cellophane tape. And that's where we get magic tape. The little Scotch tape you get at the store, that came from the Great Depression when people wanted to save food. If it's 1932, 1933, and you're trying to make the most out of every dollar, and you could, put tape on, you could repair things, you could repair money, you could repair books. You could even use Scotch tape to repair cracked eggs in your refrigerator. Farmers use Scotch tape to repair, eggs that were fertilized, and they would hatch that way. So all of those sort of things. And it's really a great story about the culture that had changed. That yes, Scotch tape was a really interesting invention, but it was more than that. It wasn't just the invention, it was the innovation. And the difference is that an invention is an idea, an innovation is people finding a use for it. And Americans during the Great Depression, their psychology changed from kind of a culture of abundance in the 1920s to a culture of scarcity, where you wanted to make sure that you saved every penny you could. Well, if you could save meat in the fridge, you could, tape an egg before you used it so that it wouldn't go bad. You did it. So it's a great way to understand how such a little simple thing made such a major difference and helps us tell that story. It's a great way to kind of introduce this culture that had changed from the 1920s to the 1930s. That's why I started. It's a great bridge. It's fun. Drew is a fantastic character. His archives at 3M, by the way, we talked a little bit about archives. Archives at 3M. Thank you to everyone at 3M. What a fantastic organization. Great records. I'm in their debt.
Love that. And as you said, I really love this story and the way that people were, just how much it showcased that mindset, right? Of how you can, one thing, multiple uses. And there's this mix of what I love throughout the book and the lessons learned there, I think, is the mix of the companies that understood what their customer base was going through and that they were able to innovate in a way that would help people to be more like have some more ingenuity and like figure something out. And based on then how you see people are starting to use the thing in a way that they never would have before, you can then innovate more to help you to stand out and make it so that the thing kind of sells itself in that way. And the story that comes to mind for me here now, knowing we're going to be jumping all over the book for you, but for the audience, they won't necessarily know, but the flour sack dresses, I think, was one of my favorite aspects. And one of the reasons for it is because today flour comes in a paper container and, everybody talks about how it's like such a mess, right? But like but when you think about, so knowing that it wasn't that way before and seeing how people were starting to use it, how the companies responded with patterns and things to help is amazing. And I love this just like sort of cyclical piece and, how again, we see those items showing up today. And it was this kind of, reuse, recycle before it was cool, but because it was necessary. But so can you share a little bit about flour sack dresses?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head that flour sack dresses are an excellent example of kind of iterative innovation between a user and the inventor and the innovator. And what was interesting is before paper bags, and those of you who lived on a farm totally understand this, take a knee on this one. But for us city folk, you need to understand that flour and feed, and it wasn't just flour, it was manure, it was sugar, it was all other things, came packaged in flour and in cotton sacks. So these were either 20, 50, 100-pound sacks. Usually 50 pounds were about right. The only reason they didn't make them bigger is because people couldn't lift them. So when you'd got, a 50-pound flour sack, during the Great Depression, what the bag manufacturers started to notice was that, rural women in Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, that sort of area, that's where all of this innovation happened, were reusing the bags. They were making clothes out of them. The cotton was really nice. The cotton was better quality than most clothes were made of at that time. It was thick. It was sturdy. It was not only did you have the cotton, you had the string that tied the bags. I mean, the whole thing. So women were making these and, making clothes. What the bag manufacturers looked at is, well, that's interesting. We might be able to encourage that. So they started to talk about, having patterns on the bag so that women would know, like, okay, well, how to cut out a dress, how to cut out a shirt, things like that. And kept looking at, okay, one of the companies that was the most popular made gingham girl. So basically the gingham check pattern. And as they did it as kind of a trademark thing years ago, but what they found was that the women were using that because that was kind of nicer than just the white cotton. So they would use the gingham pattern. So the bag manufacturers started making other patterns, other colors, all kinds of things. So what used to be when you go into the feed store in rural Minnesota somewhere, and it was just white sacks and tan sacks everywhere, it became this like cornucopia of color, this like huge rainbow of colors in there of all the different sacks. And, women would start to trade like, hey, I need more of this type of sack with this pattern. You have that type of pattern. So the feedlot folks would establish swap meets to try to figure that out. One of the biggest additional innovations, though, which is really different than how people think about upcycling today. People think about like Patagonia or Eileen Fisher, doing like, hey, patches and kind of repairs. These folks actually innovated and took it to the next level. If you've ever used a washable ink or a permanent ink, they came from this era and they both of them were invented at the same time. Here's why. Let's say you had the bag. You wanted the permanent pattern, like the gingham pattern. You wanted that because you were going to make a shirt out of that. But the bag also needed to have on it, hey, this is 40 pounds of whatever company's flour or whatever. But you wanted that to wash off. So when the women got it, and this is almost all mostly women, they would get those. They would wash the the washable ink out and then produce the clothes with it. So the bag manufacturers had to invent washable inks, to do this. So over and over again, and this is, you think, well, what has happened from then? It's permanent inks, washable inks, materials, sewing. Think about this kind of culture that has grown up. If you're in a rural area, you see this today. I mean, how many dresses do you have that have little flowers on them? How many shirts do you have that have a gingham pattern? They all come from this era. 100 years later, we're still using all of this. Now, I think kind of the fashion industry, especially fast fashion, could learn a lot from the innovation that happened during that era. It's a lot more than just repairing clothes or reselling old clothes. Like, I got news for you, Patagonia. Do better. Like, you can take a step up. If some bag manufacturer in rural Minnesota can figure this stuff out with no money in the Great Depression when they were almost broke, I've got higher expectations of the fashion industry today.
Thank you for that. And I think for any industry, we're able to see how we can look and say, well, it's just the bag. It's just a box. It's just a container that the thing comes in, and people are just going to throw it away. But like, what if they didn't, right? And it doesn't have to be, it's great when you have things that you can do to say, like, shoes that are made from recycled bottles, like, love that. That's amazing. And I like, I like my Rothy's that they come from that space, right? But like, I can't do that. I can't turn this bottle into anything. And so, then the process of asking someone to send something back to you, and then how does that whole process work? And that's still important. But if you think about, like we were talking about, that kind of led into this, when you looking to pitch, looking to sell, thinking about product innovation, and that it can come in something that makes it so everything becomes usable in some other way, and somebody gets to be creative and they can, riff off of your pattern and make their own. And like you said, the sense of community that comes from the swap, being able to have this conversation when you're able to get people together at the same time. And so, and being able to kind of show off what you made, and you can learn together, and just a really cool thing. And where, like you were saying in the book, that the, wives would give their husbands, it's like, you're going to the store and you better get this pattern because I need this one. It has to look just like this to finish the dress, or whatever that happens to be. And so then you look at where price isn't about the price anymore, right? People want that flower, and you might stock up and get a little extra flower this month so you can finish the pattern for the clothes that you need for, a get together that you're having next week or whatever that happens to be. And I think that's just such an important aspect. There's so many stories in the book of things where we think about the Great Depression, like you've already said, the Grapes of Wrath, Dust Bowl, which, lots of truth in those, right? But like, as difficult times, but you feel like nobody has anything and there's no money to spend on anything ever at all. And to know that people bought refrigerators and invested in a refrigerator. They invested in cameras. And you'd say, like, why? Why would you buy a camera when you're struggling, to get food or whatever that happens to be? But those innovations, and that people were willing to spend money on things like that at that time, and that the companies knew and understood their customer base to make those different innovations for people at that time. Can you share a little bit about kind of the thought process that comes, in that way, as you're looking to shape and look around you of what those opportunities are?
Yeah, I would say that people think about, and since the Great Depression, we have kind of, as a society, and certainly as a government, and this won't be kind of a government thing, I promise I will not go down that road. But I will say that we really work hard to try to smooth out all of the rough patches. We don't want, like, if inflation is too high, or, unemployment is too high, it goes into collective freakout. And yes, totally get it. There is a lot of pain there. I'm not trying to minimize that at all. I am trying to say, though, that, for instance, unemployment in the Great Depression peaked at about 25%. More people than that were underemployed. But think about that the other way. I always kind of flip a statistic on its head. 75% or more, that was the peak, was 25%. The average unemployment during the Great Depression was about 10%, which is very high. 90% of people had jobs. They had income. They were spending money. Now, psychologically, they were thinking about that differently, but there was money to be spent. People were making investments in things that mattered to them. And companies that understood, innovators that understood customer needs, realized that it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the price. It was about how do you satisfy that need. People will find the money to do it. People found the equivalent of $3,000 in today's money to buy a refrigerator, because they looked at it and they said, wow, this thing is going to save me money in the long run because I can save food at home. I don't have to go every day. I could stock up on meat. If I found a good deal, I could stock up on that and get that. Awesome. But it isn't just kind of the rational side. People bought color film for their cameras because they're like, wow, I want to take photos of things. I want to travel. I want to see all this stuff. I want to capture these memories. So even in the most depressing possible time, people were buying cameras in huge numbers because they wanted to see the world around them. It was kind of a fun thing. I mean, how many people take photos on their smartphones? There's an argument to be made that your smartphone is a smart camera with a phone attached. That most people, the camera is the number one app they use, and by far takes up the most space, on their phone. So it's so important, especially as, we go into more challenging economic times. People think, oh, well, this is going to be bad. We're all going to hunker down and nothing will happen. Quite the opposite is very likely to happen. More things will become, it puts pressure on people. And when there's pressure, people will kind of feel free from what decision-making process they had before, and will kind of have an excuse to look anew at different things. Actually, when there are lots of stories in the book, my personal favorite is the chapter on dog food. That basically during the Great Depression, what is really shocking, and no one had put this research together before, so it's one of those chances where, yes, this sort of look at it really will change the conversation. Pets became a thing in the Great Depression. Not just a thing, pets became part of the family during the Great Depression. So if you have a dog or if you have a cat and you treat them like family, that comes back from that era where the first time we had dedicated dog and cat food, the first time we had toys for dogs and cats, the first time we had vets that would actually treat dogs and cats. This was an entire kind of cultural shift. And people thought, well, why on earth? I mean, this is another mouth to feed, quite literally another mouth to feed in the family. Well, think about that. When you're stressed, what do? Dogs and cats and pets are one of the best ways to reduce stress. Does it surprise us at all in retrospect that people would bring dogs and cats and make them part of the family when it was the most stressful time that you could possibly have? We decided to spend what limited resources we had on bringing new family members in, creating more of a mixed family. As the number of kids was going down, the number of pets was going up, almost in lockstep. So it was just thinking about, like, when people talk with me all the time about, like, oh gosh, what's going to happen over the next X number of years, recession or bad things and tariffs and all this stuff. You say, look for the opportunities. Because they will be there. This is kind of an innovator's dream. It's kind of a nightmare for everyone else, but it is an innovator's dream when things go bad.
Oh, definitely. And I too really enjoyed the chapter on dog food. I was thinking about that while we're talking about the cameras and the things you spend on, and knowing that also for everybody, miniature golf, ski resorts, place to go take those color pictures, right? You want to be doing that, and how the innovations came throughout were, mentioned, and, they have their chapters in the book as well. And so to know that, like you said, what's cool about something like the pet food, right? And so you talk about the process of creating the kibble, and that, it helped companies where they were having to get rid of stuff that would have just been, no human wants to eat that thing, but you can turn it into something that is sellable, that is able to be, a better process for the companies to be making more money using scrap, because the pets aren't going to complain about the taste of the food and whatnot. And so then the family gets something that's of value. And just thinking about this shift of, people having pets, right? That's like a thing I can have, and even realizing, like you said, with the vet, all the innovation that has to happen kind of around to make it work, I think is really interesting. So for someone who is an innovator or a product designer, or they're thinking about repositioning the way that they talk about their product, pitching and selling in a new environment, right? Where we're saying we are, at the time of this recording, there's some economic shift about. So if we're keeping that in mind, knowing that the things ebb and flow, but, we're at a crux of a shift. Things are happening. And if you have to be thinking about repositioning, what advice do you give to people as we look to apply lessons that they'll get from your books? What are some key things that you would advise for innovators and inventors and the like?
I think we train innovators to understand their audience and understand their audience's needs, which are critical. And obviously, that's like innovation 101. If you want to kind of take a step up, what you really need to understand is the entire ecosystem around that innovation. What does it mean, for instance, to have pets in your home that are part of your family? And you kind of brought up a number of those things, but they bear repeating. That, okay, well, I need medical care. I need veterinary care. And there were no vets. Vets were horse vets or livestock vets. There were no small animal vets before the Great Depression. So, okay, we need vets. We need veterinary offices. There were no veterinary offices. There weren't doctors' offices back then, by the way, either. Medical doctors stole that idea from vets who had to have individual rooms to treat pets because dogs and cats would fight each other. So they need to have lobbies. They needed to have individual exam rooms. Doctors stole that from vets. Just understand that. So, okay, well, you needed vet rooms. We needed food for pets. We needed dedicated food that needed to be shelf stable. Okay, well, how is that food going to be cost effective? So we're going to use parts of the animal that were often not eaten by humans. Okay, well, we make that. You also needed to invent co-packaging, which was, okay, one factory could make lots of different types of kibble for lots of different brands to meet lots of different needs. Okay, great. Well, now that you've got basically a new family member in the home, is that family member going to get a Christmas present? Probably going to get a birthday present, probably going to have toys, probably going to have clothes, which are completely unnecessary, by the way, unless you've got one of those hairless cats in a northern climate. They don't need clothes. All of those things, if you think about this entire ecosystem and you really start to draw the line to, in order to satisfy this one new need, what are all the things that might happen around it? Then you're going to be able to start to spot the opportunities. And you'll really see, is my invention or is my idea going to coordinate or kind of fight against all of these other things? And you want to make sure that you are kind of part of a community where you are understanding all of the new things that are going to have to happen in order to make this one idea work. So yes, a customer and their needs, critical, must do. You have to make money on your own thing. If you can't make money on your own thing, you're in a lot of trouble. The industry might do well, but you won't. You need to find out what does that ecosystem look like? What are all the coordinating innovations that are going to happen? Because sometimes your idea just might not be timed right. Like, let's say in 1925, you created an entire line of little clothes for dogs. You had a few people who were really super early adopters, and they put clothes on their dogs. How many dog sweaters do you think you're going to sell in 1925? Not many. How many do you think you're going to sell in 1935? A lot. You will sell a ton more. It's kind of a timing thing. You have to be really conscious that what needs to change. And many innovators struggle with time and timing as part of that. And the more you can understand the ecosystem and how things are going to kind of develop, the better you will be in knowing when to release and what your expectations should be when you do.
Absolutely. So for someone that is thinking about this today and they're looking for their opportunity that exists, would you recommend they start making friends that might be in these other industries or spaces and other innovators? Are they finding something where there's stuff that's starting to like fall into place and you're just going to insert yourself in a spot that's like a blind spot for these other companies, a mix of it? What's the thing to be looking for those who are getting ready to get scrappy?
Yeah, when you're thinking about whatever domain that you're thinking, whatever idea, the best thing you can possibly do is go make friends. Just get out there. I think many innovators today are too comfortable behind a screen. They're too comfortable kind of online and on forums, like, hey, I'm hanging out on Reddit. Just understand kind of a rule of online engagement, that you kind of have the 1-9-90 rule. 1% of people are engaged, 9% of people will comment or like, and then 90% of people are lurkers. And then that's just the tip of the iceberg. Most of the iceberg are people who are just not engaged at all. They're just not in it at all. And if you are designing your product based on the 1% of people who are commenting and who are engaged, you're kind of like the tail is wagging the dog, to kind of continue the metaphor. You need to be out talking to the 80% of people who are not posting on Reddit, who just aren't out there. You need to get out there. You need to talk with people. You need to, like, hey, if you are into, like, hey, you think that iguanas are going to be the next big pet, whatever. I don't know. I doubt it. But let's say that they are. You need to figure out, you need to get out there, and you probably should have an iguana at home. You probably should be talking with vets. You probably should be making friends with pet food places. Like, okay, well, I better know that in Florida, for instance, they consider them an invasive species. So, okay, well, what are the laws around that? You just have to kind of get into it. You have to, whatever domain you're in, you've got to be interested. You have to have that curiosity. You got to get out there and experience it. And a lot of inventors that I talk to, they're not quite prepared for that. I don't think they're curious enough. And when I think about what makes the difference between a successful and an unsuccessful innovator, there are a lot of things. Luck plays a big part of it. But people think it's like money and connections. It's much more luck and curiosity. That's the big thing. I mean, like, yeah, grit is important. You got to kind of see it through. You got to be patient. There are a lot of other things. There are a lot of great qualities. But if you're not curious about your domain, you might as well stop. You're done. Like, that is the number one trait you can cultivate, is just be interested. And if you find yourself like, well, I'm not really interested in that, don't try to innovate there. You won't be successful.
Yes.
It's kind of write what you like, write what you love, write what you know. You have to be interested in it. Simple as that.
Awesome. Well, great advice for people as they are going to be looking for, whether it's just reframing the way you talk about your existing product and service, if you're looking to add things on either side, or you're looking to enter into a new market or space, or create something brand new. Lots of options, lots of insights, and so much more within the book. So for everyone now that is so excited to go get their copy of the book, and to follow you and all the things, right? What's their best path to do so?
Yeah, the easiest place. One of the good things and the bad things about having a name like Jason Voiovich is that I'm like Tigger. I'm the only one. So if you search for me on the Google, you will find me. Yeah, I'm pretty easy. The best place, though, I write innovation history on Substack. So I would invite you to go and subscribe to that. You'll get an email from me once a week or so with different kind of historical tidbits on, notes about the books coming out and things like that, different opportunities for innovators and inventors. Or on Amazon is the other good place to find me. You find the books on Amazon really, really easily. If you're a professional, you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. Again, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn as well. I'm really open. I am interested in connecting with anyone who is inventing, innovative, creative, anything like that. I would do this if no one paid me. It's something that is kind of a passion for me. I'm very interested in it. So find me, connect with me, and I will help you any way I can.
Awesome. Well, we will, of course, have links in the show notes to make it easy for people. For those who don't instantly know how they would spell Voiovich, we'll have that for them. And we've got lots of options. So thank you so much again for joining me. It was delightful to chat with you once again.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you again to Jason Voiovich for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? For me, I really love the difference in the background and experience between the stories from this book and Jason's last book. The foundation of choice culture was amazing and a great insight into behavioral science itself. And then transitioning to the innovation of need and how brands had to shift their product offerings to meet a different type of consumer mindset was really fascinating. I also, of course, love how this really emulates how whether or not people buy isn't about the price or the rational reasoning behind buying. Instead, it's all about the psychological stuff that happens before you get to the price. And that comes in truly understanding your consumer, like I talk about in my book, The Truth About Pricing. Refrigerators, for example, being a huge expense for people, but knowing how much it can save you in the long run made it a great investment and something worth saving up for and buying now, even if it kept you from paying for other things. The same, of course, went for cameras and color film and domesticated pets and veterinary services. It was definitely not a need, but they mattered to people when they, logically looking back, might feel like it was a frivolous expense. But it wasn't about that at all. Smart companies and marketers understood that and were able to appeal to those masses and succeed at a time where others might fail. Similar to those flour sack dresses, which might just be my favorite chapter in the book. To see how a company could innovate about the bag something came in, what arguably didn't matter, but turning it into a value add opportunity that made it so people wanted to buy a specific brand because of the bag it came in, and might stock up on patterns and being able to connect with others and showing how a brand really understood the customer base and invested in innovation to develop the different inks to make it possible is so cool. And I love that it's another one of those things that I'm sure other flour brands would have said it was a waste of time, money, and resources. I'm sure that short-term mindset made it so some brands lost a lot of market share to the brands that did invest in the bigger picture and provided so much added value to their customers. While we touched on a lot of stories today, we barely scratched the surface of the insights in the book. The history of Monopoly, penny restaurants, The Little House on the Prairie, King Kong, Ripley's Believe It or Not, Snow White, mini golf and ski resorts, Superman, and so much more are waiting for you in its pages. If you're at all a fan of history, I highly recommend checking out Bullfrogs Bingo and The Little House on the Prairie, How Innovators of the Great Depression Made the Best of the Worst of Times. And as we enter into a new chapter in our own world economy, it's probably a good time to consider your own business model. What products or services that you offer aren't going to be a good fit into this new era? What pivots might you make? What innovations could be built into your packaging or peripheral opportunities? Is there something new to make? What will people care about, even if, the most logical out there say they shouldn't? What's your dog food or flour sack dress pattern? If you have any ideas, we'd love to hear about them on social media. You'll find me as the Brainy Biz pretty much everywhere, and as Melina Palmer on LinkedIn. There are links in the show notes to make it easy to connect with and tag both Jason and myself, as well as links to my top related past episodes and books, including Bullfrogs Bingo and The Little House on the Prairie, and more. It's all waiting for you in the app you're listening to and at thebrainybusiness.com/503. And thank you again to Jason Voiovich for joining me on the show today. It was a delight to chat with and learn from you. Join me Tuesday for another Brainy episode of the Brainy Business Podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. You don't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.